Her heels echoed in the empty garage. Then a hand yanked her into the dark. She screamed until a voice cut through. "Let her go!" A black cop stepped from the shadows. The man she was taught to fear had just saved her life.
Rachel Whitmore had always lived in a carefully manicured world. The sprawling, white-pillared house on the edge of the wealthy suburb wasn't just her home, it was the fortress of her upbringing, a place where old traditions ruled and her father's voice was law. To outsiders, her life looked charmed. Designer clothes, expensive cars, champagne-drenched weekends at country clubs. But beneath the satin curtains and polished floors was a darker inheritance, an ideology woven into her from childhood. Her father never minced words. "Black men are dangerous, Rachel," he'd say, his voice booming across the dinner table like a judge passing down a sentence. "They're unpredictable, violent. You don't know what they're capable of." Her mother would nod quietly, her fork slicing into the Sunday roast as if it were simply another fact of life, as real as taxes or death. Rachel, with her hourglass figure and striking green eyes, never questioned it. Why would she? The rules of her world had always been clear. Privilege and control belonged to people like her, and suspicion was meant for those who didn't fit into that picture. She grew up believing it was common sense, a kind of inherited truth passed from one generation of Whitmores to the next. And yet, sometimes, when the house was quiet and she was alone, she felt an odd unease. Like something in those words didn't quite settle. But she shoved the thought away, drowning it with reality TV, endless shopping trips, and gossip over wine with equally sheltered friends. Until the night everything changed. It was late. Rachel's heels clacked against the cold concrete floor of the parking garage as she walked briskly toward her car. The echo seemed louder than usual, amplified by the eerie silence. The air smelled faintly of oil and damp cement, and each flickering fluorescent light above her sent her nerves on edge. She hugged her coat tighter, her curvy frame moving faster, every step filled with an urgency she couldn't explain. Her key fob was in her hand when she noticed it, a shadow shifting behind a nearby column. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but then the shadow moved again, closer, deliberate. Her heart skipped. Before she could react, a masked man lunged at her from the dark. His grip was iron around her arm, yanking her toward the far end of the garage. She let out a sharp scream, her voice swallowed by the emptiness around her. Her heels scraped against the floor. She struggled, panic clawing at her throat. Every story her father had told her flashed in her mind like lightning. Every warning, every fearful whisper about men like him. Only now, it wasn't a faceless news report. It was her life on the line. Her chest tightened, her breath rapid, when suddenly a voice cut through the chaos, deep, commanding, steady. "Hey, let her go." Rachel froze. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw him, a man stepping into the garage, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a police uniform. His presence seemed to shake the attacker for a split second, but it was enough. The officer moved swiftly, pulling Rachel free and pinning the masked man with practiced precision. The struggle ended almost as quickly as it began. Rachel stumbled back, gasping, her pulse roaring in her ears. Her savior turned to her, his dark eyes scanning her with calm concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone low but reassuring. He extended his hand toward her. Rachel's gaze darted to his hand, then up to his face, and in that moment, her chest tightened for an entirely different reason. He was black. Her father's voice echoed instantly in her mind, a ghost that clung to her ribs. "You can't trust them. You don't know what they're capable of." She hesitated. Every instinct ingrained in her screamed caution. He had just saved her life, and yet she felt her hand tremble at the idea of taking his. Her throat was dry, words catching like thorns as she forced them out. I'm fine," she stammered, stepping back slightly. Her eyes wouldn't quite meet his. The officer didn't push. He only gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "Just make sure you stay safe." He turned back toward the subdued attacker as backup sirens echoed in the distance. Rachel's knees felt weak, her entire body trembling, not just from the assault, but from the storm inside her. The man who had just risked himself to protect her wasn't supposed to exist in her world. He wasn't supposed to be the savior. He was supposed to be the threat. But the contradiction was undeniable. Her heart still raced as she slid into her car, locking the doors with shaking hands. Her reflection in the rearview mirror showed wide, frightened eyes rimmed with disbelief. For years, she had swallowed her family's prejudice as gospel, never questioning it. But now, her life had been saved by a black cop, a man her father would say she should never trust. Officer Marcus Carter. That was the name she'd later hear in the police report. A name that would become etched into her thoughts, her doubts, her restless nights. Rachel didn't know it yet, but that moment, the flickering lights, the attacker's grip, and the strong hand that saved her, was the fracture in the foundation of her world, a single crack in the glass you'd been looking through her whole life. And once it broke, there would be no way to put it back together again.
The Whitmore dining room had always been a stage. Every evening, the chandelier above their long oak table cast a warm glow over carefully plated meals, crystal glasses, and polished silverware. And every evening, Rachel's father performed his role. The stern patriarch, voice steady, opinions unwavering, dictating the rhythm of conversation. Tonight, though, the air was heavier than usual. The roast chicken on Rachel's plate had grown cold. Her fork scraped absent-mindedly against the china, her appetite crushed under the weight of the memory replaying in her mind. The masked man, the iron grip, the uniformed officer who pulled her free. Her father was the first to break the silence. His dark eyes narrowed across the table, his voice measured but sharp. "Rachel, we need to talk about this." Her stomach tightened. She knew what was coming. She had been rehearsing excuses all day, though none seemed convincing even to herself. Her mother leaned in, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're going to be working with that officer, aren't you? The black one." The words slipped from her tongue like something sour. Rachel's chest tightened. She began, her voice faltering. "I didn't choose this. He's the officer assigned to the case. I'm a witness, and You should have refused," her father interrupted, his voice rising. "You don't have to put yourself in that position. Don't you see? He's just one of them. You can't trust him." The words struck her like a slap. She swallowed hard, her throat burning. The image of Marcus Carter's steady eyes and calm voice filled her mind, clashing violently with her father's contempt. "He saved me," she said, softly, almost too quietly to be heard. But her father heard. His face hardened, his jaw tightening with visible disgust. "Saved you? Don't be naive, Rachel. He was doing his job. Don't confuse that with virtue. Men like him—" He stopped, shaking his head as though the thought alone disgusted him. "They don't belong in positions of authority. He'll use this to make himself look good, nothing more." Her mother reached across the table, her perfectly manicured fingers brushing Rachel's wrist. "Honey, listen to your father. We've told you these things for a reason. You've seen the reports, the news. It's all the same story. They act decent when eyes are on them, but underneath, you don't know what they're capable of." Her fork clattered against her plate. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in. She had heard these speeches all her life, absorbed them like second-hand smoke. But tonight, something inside her resisted. Her father's voice pressed harder, cutting through her silence. "I don't understand why you'd even trust him. A black officer? You're better than this. Don't throw away your sense for a fleeting moment of gratitude." She looked down at her plate, her stomach churning. The words "better than this" rang hollow. Better than what? Better than seeing Marcus as a man who had protected her? Better than admitting her parents might be wrong? The truth pressed on her chest like a weight she couldn't push away. He had saved her, and not just with strength, but with calm, steady professionalism that had made her feel safe in the most terrifying moment of her life. That was real, not an illusion. Her lips trembled as she forced the words out. "He saved me," she repeated, louder this time. Her mother's eyes softened for a flicker of a moment, but her father's face grew darker, his hand slamming against the table hard enough to rattle the silverware. "Enough! You don't know him. Don't you dare sit here and pretend one moment erases generations of truth. We raised you better than this." She flinched, her heart pounding. His words echoed in her ears, but the effect wasn't the same as it had always been. For the first time, doubt cracked through the certainty she had carried since childhood. She thought of Marcus again, how he had handled her attacker without unnecessary violence, how his eyes had searched hers with genuine concern, how he had stepped back when she recoiled, respecting her fear instead of pressing against it. That was not the behavior of a monster. That was not danger. That was humanity. But how could she say that aloud? How could she admit, in this house, built on generations of prejudice, that she no longer trusted the foundation beneath her feet? Her voice came out as a whisper, fragile and trembling. "I don't know what to believe anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Her father's face was stone, unreadable except for the disappointment radiating from every line. Her mother looked down at her plate, lips pursed, avoiding her daughter's eyes. Rachel pushed her food around with her fork, unable to eat. Her appetite had drowned beneath the storm inside her. The woman she had always been, the dutiful daughter, the believer in her father's truth, was at war with something new, something raw and unfamiliar. That night, lying in her room beneath silk sheets, she replayed the parking garage over and over. Her father's voice and Marcus's overlapped in her mind, two opposing forces pulling her apart. Her father's warnings were sharp and absolute, but Marcus's voice, the way he had said, "Are you okay?" with calm certainty, lingered longer. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from an unknown number lit the screen. "This is Officer Marcus Carter, just making sure you're safe tonight." Her heart leapt, heat rushing to her cheeks. She stared at the words, hesitant. For years she had been told not to trust a man like him, and yet reading that message she felt something entirely different. Reassurance. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling. Finally she typed back, "I'm safe, thank you." She placed the phone face down, her heart still racing. As she closed her eyes, the weight of her father's voice lingered, but Marcus's text pulsed like a lifeline in the dark. For the first time in her life, Rachel wondered if her family had been wrong. And if they were, what did that make her?
The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and polished marble, its echoing halls filled with the shuffle of shoes and the low murmur of voices. Rachel sat nervously on a wooden bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, waiting for her turn to testify. Every detail of the night in the parking garage had been burned into her memory, and she knew soon she'd have to recount it in front of strangers. Her nerves had already been frayed, but when she saw Marcus Carter enter the room, a new kind of tension rippled through her. He wore his uniform as though it were a second skin, crisp, neat, authoritative. He carried himself with a quiet confidence, not arrogance, but an undeniable strength. She hadn't expected to see him this much. At first he had been a one-time savior, a face she thought would vanish once the case was handed over. But fate had tethered them together. She was a key witness, and he was part of the investigation. Their paths crossed more often now, and every time they did, she felt something shifting inside her. She pretended to look away as Marcus approached a group of elderly citizens across the hall. They had been called for jury duty, their frail forms hunched in stiff courthouse chairs. She watched as Marcus smiled gently, shaking hands, leaning down to help an older woman with her walker. He carried her bag without hesitation, guided another man toward the right courtroom, and spoke to them with patience that seemed endless. Rachel's breath caught. There was no performance here, no audience to impress, just genuine kindness. He wasn't doing it for praise. He was doing it because he cared. The scene clashed violently with everything her father had drilled into her. If black men were truly as dangerous, as heartless, as untrustworthy as she had always been told, then what was this? What kind of danger looked like compassion? Her mind tried to resist the thought, but her heart pulled her deeper into it. Later that day, Rachel found herself seated in the courtroom, her palms sweaty as she waited for the defense attorney to finish his tirade. A man accused of assaulting his neighbor stood red-faced, his anger spilling into every word. When the gavel slammed, demanding order, it was Marcus who stepped forward to maintain control. The man turned on him, his voice rising. "You don't tell me what to do. I don't have to listen to you." His finger jabbed the air, his face flushed with rage. Rachel stiffened, waiting for the explosion, waiting for Marcus to respond the way her father's warnings told her he would, with aggression, with violence, with the same danger she had been taught to fear. But Marcus didn't. He stood calm, unshaken, his deep voice even. "I understand you're upset," he said firmly, "but I need you to take a seat so we can continue. No one's here to hurt you." The courtroom hushed. For a moment, the man's fury flickered, almost confused by the lack of escalation. Slowly, grumbling under his breath, he sat. Rachel's eyes widened. She had seen her father shout down waiters, intimidate landscapers, raise his voice at anyone he deemed lesser. But here was Marcus, faced with someone hurling rage directly at him, and he had met it not with force, but with restraint, with dignity. It unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. That night, sitting in her car outside her parents' home, Rachel replayed the scene over and over. She thought of the stories she had been told. Black men were reckless, quick to violence, untrustworthy. But what she had seen was the opposite: patience, professionalism, control. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Marcus. "You did well today. It's not easy standing up in court like that." Rachel hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen. Why was he checking in on her? Why did it make her chest tighten in ways she didn't understand? She typed back slowly, "Thank you. I was nervous, but you helped." A moment later, his reply appeared. "That's what I'm here for. To protect, to help. Doesn't matter who it is." She read the words again and again, her throat tight. It was so simple, so clear. Doesn't matter who it is. The next week, she watched him again, this time outside the courthouse. A mother was struggling with her toddler, the child kicking and screaming in frustration. Marcus crouched down, meeting the boy's eyes, speaking softly until the tantrum faded. He handed the boy a sticker from his pocket, smiling as the child clung to his mother, calmer now. Rachel couldn't look away. She didn't understand how she had ever imagined him as a threat, how she had let her family paint men like him in such harsh, cruel strokes. But as she drove home that evening, guilt gnawed at her. For 28 years, she had lived with those beliefs unchallenged. She had laughed at the jokes, nodded at the dinner table, let fear shape her choices. Now seeing Marcus, she realized how much of her life had been built on lies. When she walked into her family's home, her father was waiting in the living room, drink in hand. He asked, "How was court?" His tone was casual, but his eyes sharp, searching. Rachel's mouth dried. She wanted to tell him what she had seen, how Marcus had calmed the storm without raising his voice, how he had treated strangers with a respect her father had never shown anyone. But she couldn't. Not yet. Instead, she muttered, "It was fine," and retreated to her room. Lying in bed, she stared at the ceiling, her thoughts restless. She remembered Marcus's words, "Doesn't matter who it is." Something in her heart shifted. Marcus Carter was no longer just the man who had saved her. He was the living proof that everything she had been raised to believe was wrong. And that realization terrified her, almost as much as it freed her.
The police precinct was not what Rachel had expected. She had imagined it as a place of pure order, steel desks, clipped voices, clean lines of authority. Instead, it buzzed with a strange energy,
Ringing phones, murmured conversations, the smell of burnt coffee mixing with ink and dust. Rachel sat quietly in the waiting area, her fingers twined tightly in her lap. She was there to sign final paperwork about the parking garage incident, nothing more. Or so she told herself. The truth was, she had volunteered to come in person instead of letting it be handled over the phone because some part of her wanted to see Marcus again. Her eyes wandered, searching for him, when a sharp voice snapped her attention toward the break room. "Come on, Carter," a man's voice sneered, full of derision. Rachel's head turned. Through the open door, she saw Marcus standing tall, his posture rigid but composed. Across from him was another officer, a white man with thinning blonde hair and a permanent smirk etched across his face. "You don't get to make the call here," the man barked. "You're not in charge. Know your place." The words landed like a slap. Rachel's stomach twisted. She had heard those exact tones before, at her family's dinner table, whispered in country club lounges, spoken like unchallenged truths. But to see it here, hurled at Marcus in his own precinct, made her chest burn. Marcus's expression stayed calm, his voice steady. "I'm doing my job," he said simply, "and I expect the same respect I give to everyone else." The other officer scoffed, shaking his head. "Respect? You're a joke, Carter. Just another one of them. Don't get too comfortable in that uniform." Rachel's breath caught. The words were so blatant, so venomous, that for a moment she couldn't move. She had always known prejudice lived in whispers, in sidewise glances, in warnings cloaked as wisdom. But here it was, naked and cruel, spat out without hesitation. Her fists clenched in her lap. Marcus didn't flinch. His face was composed, his body still. But she saw it, in his eyes, in the way his jaw tightened ever so slightly. He had heard this before. He had endured it before. And still he stood there, swallowing it like it was just another part of the job. Something inside Rachel broke. All her life she had stayed silent. Silent when her father ridiculed black neighbors, silent when her friends whispered cruel stereotypes behind closed doors, silent when her mother passed judgment as casually as pouring a glass of wine. But now watching Marcus bear the weight of it, this man who had saved her life, who had shown her kindness without expecting anything in return, she felt a fire in her chest that demanded release. The officer turned away with a dismissive snort, muttering under his breath. Rachel stood. Her heels clicked sharply against the tile as she crossed the room, her steps faster, firmer than she thought possible. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharper than she had ever used in public. Both men turned, Marcus in surprise, the white officer with annoyance. "You don't get to talk to him that way," Rachel said, her voice trembling but loud enough to cut through the room. Her face was flushed, her hands shaking, but she didn't care. "You don't get to humiliate him just because you think you can. He's twice the man you'll ever be." The break room fell silent. A few heads from the hallway turned, curious eyes widening at the sight of a well-dressed white woman defending a black officer so openly. The blonde officer's smirk faltered. "Who the hell are you?" he asked. "I'm someone who watched him save my life. Someone who saw him stand with dignity when you tried to tear him down. You think that uniform makes you better? No. It's how you wear it. And Marcus Carter wears it with more honor than you'll ever understand." The man's jaw worked soundlessly, caught off guard by her ferocity. Her pulse hammered in her throat, but she didn't back down. She had never spoken like this before, not to her father, not to anyone. The fear of rejection had always kept her quiet. But now standing there, her voice shaking in defense of Marcus, she felt a strange liberation course through her veins. Marcus finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "That's enough," he said, looking at Rachel with eyes that held both gratitude and warning. He didn't want her caught in the fallout. But Rachel couldn't stop. "No," she said, her voice breaking but loud. "It's not enough. Because I've been silent my whole life. I let people I love spew the same poison, and I sat there, nodding along. And it's wrong. It was always wrong." The blonde officer rolled his eyes, muttering, "Unbelievable," before storming out. But the damage had been done.
Every officer in earshot had heard. Her chest heaved, her hands trembling, as she realized what she had just done. The room seemed to vibrate with tension. Marcus stepped closer, his voice low, meant only for her. "You didn't have to do that." She met his eyes, her throat tight. "Yes, I did." For a long moment, they just stood there, the world around them fading into silence. His gaze was unreadable, but there was something in it she hadn't seen before, a flicker of something soft, something human that went beyond duty. Later that evening, outside the courthouse, the backlash came swiftly. A small crowd had gathered, neighbors, acquaintances, even members of her own community. Word had spread of what she had done, of what she had said. Her family stood in the center of it, her father's face red with rage, her mother's eyes filled with cold disappointment. "You embarrassed us," her father spat as she approached. Her voice was sharp enough to slice through the murmurs of the crowd. "You stood in front of everyone and defended him. Him!" Her hands shook, but her voice came steady this time. "What happened wasn't justice, it was racism, and I won't stay silent anymore." The crowd murmured louder. Shock, disbelief, even anger rippled through their expressions, but Rachel didn't care. For the first time in her life, she didn't care. Her father's face contorted. "You're making a mistake, Rachel. A mistake that will cost you everything." Rachel lifted her chin, meeting his eyes without flinching. "Maybe, but at least it will be my choice, not yours, not anyone else's." She turned then, her gaze finding Marcus across the street. He stood still, watching, his expression unreadable, but his eyes, those dark, steady eyes, were filled with something that made her chest ache. Understanding. In that moment, she felt it, the bond between them, silent but unbreakable. It was no longer just about gratitude, no longer just about doubt. It was about truth. And for the first time, she was ready to face it.
Rachel sat in her car, parked on the quiet street just outside her family's estate. The house loomed in the distance, its white pillars lit by the soft glow of porch lights. To anyone else, it looked like a symbol of grandeur, a fortress of wealth and tradition. But to Rachel, it had become something else, an echo chamber of prejudice, a cage disguised as comfort. Her father's words from earlier still rang in her ears. "You're making a mistake that will cost you everything." Once, she would have believed him. She would have swallowed her doubts, smothered them with obedience, and let the cycle continue. But not anymore. The woman sitting in the car now was not the same woman who had stumbled into that parking garage weeks ago, terrified and clinging to her family's beliefs like a lifeline. That Rachel had been shaped by fear, molded by prejudice, blinded by ignorance. This Rachel, the Rachel who had stood up in front of a room full of strangers and defended Marcus Carter, was someone else entirely. She was raw, unsettled, uncertain of the road ahead, but she was free. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat, pulling her from her thoughts. A message lit up the screen. "Marcus Carter, are you okay? I heard about what happened outside the courthouse." Her throat tightened. She picked up the phone, her fingers trembling. "Rachel, I don't know. My family, they hate me for what I said, for standing with you." The reply came quickly, as if he'd been waiting for her. "Then they don't really hate you. They hate the truth you spoke. Don't let that break you." Tears stung her eyes. She leaned her head back against the seat, staring at the roof of the car. For so long she had been terrified of losing her family's approval. It had been the compass of her life, guiding every choice. But Marcus was right. What they hated wasn't her. It was the mirror she had held up to them, forcing them to see the ugliness they had spent years justifying. She typed back slowly. "You saved me that night, Marcus. But you've done more than that. You've made me see the world differently, see myself differently." There was a pause before his reply came. "You did that, Rachel. I just gave you the moment. You chose the truth." Her chest tightened, her heart aching in a way that was both painful and electric. She thought back to all the times she had watched him, helping strangers, de-escalating anger, standing tall in the face of cruelty. Each memory was a piece of a puzzle that had come together to reveal something undeniable. She admired him, she respected him, and though the thought still scared her, she loved him. It wasn't the kind of love she had been raised to expect, the neatly arranged kind that her parents approved of, with men from the right families and the right background. This was different. This was messy and raw, born from conflict and truth. But it was real. The next morning, Rachel met Marcus outside a small cafe in the city. He was off duty, dressed in a simple black jacket and jeans. Without the uniform, he looked different, more approachable, more human, yet still carrying that quiet strength that had first unsettled her. "Hey," he said softly as she approached. Her breath caught. For a moment she just looked at him, her heart pounding with everything she wanted to say. "Hi," she whispered back. They sat at a corner table, the hum of conversation around them fading into background noise. For a while they didn't speak, just sipped coffee and watched the world pass by outside the window. Finally, Rachel found the courage. "My whole life I was taught to fear you. Not you specifically, but men like you. My family, my community. They built walls around me and I believed them. I carried that fear like armor. Until you." Marcus's eyes softened. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush her. "You saved me," she continued. "Not just that night in the garage, but every day since. You showed me patience when I doubted you, kindness when I hesitated, strength when others tried to tear you down. And she swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "I love you, Marcus." The words hung between them, fragile and trembling, but true. Marcus leaned back, his gaze steady, as though he were weighing the depth of what she had just said. Then, slowly, he reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "Rachel," he said softly, his voice steady and warm, "I've spent my whole life being told I don't belong, in neighborhoods, in schools, even in this job. But hearing that from you, after everything, that means more than you know." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't care what anyone says anymore. Not my father, not my mother, not the whole damn community. They can call me a traitor, a fool, whatever they want. I won't stay silent. Not when it comes to what's right. Not when it comes to you." For the first time since she had met him, Marcus's composure cracked into a smile. A small, genuine smile that reached his eyes and made her heart ache with relief. "Then we'll face it together," he said. They sat there for a long while, hands intertwined. Two people from worlds that were never meant to meet, bound now by something greater than fear. Later, as Rachel drove away, she thought of the girl she had once been, the one who had walked briskly through that parking garage, heels clicking against concrete, clutching her privilege like a shield. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who had faced her family, her community, her own ignorance, and chosen something radical. She had chosen love. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. She knew the whispers would grow louder, the judgment harsher, but she also knew that silence was no longer an option. Her reflection in the rearview mirror showed a face streaked with tears, but her eyes burned with clarity. "I never knew how much I needed to change until now," she whispered to herself. And as the city lights blurred behind her, Rachel Whitmore felt truly free for the first time in her life.